Hi, everyone. I'm Rosemarie Miller, and the Minnesota State House of Representatives recently passed a bill that will create the first Office of Missing and Murdered Black Women and Girls in the United States. And today, we have the woman who led the bill, Representative Ruth Richardson. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Representative Richardson, you put forth this bill, and I want to start off with some numbers, some hard statistics. Could you tell me what's going on?
When we started this conversation at the Minnesota legislature back in 2019, the estimates were that there were somewhere between 64,000 and 75,000 Black women and girls that were missing in the United States. And what that number told us is that we have absolutely no idea how many Black women and girls are missing throughout the US. And fast forward to 2020, when we were able to do some work around establishing the nation's first task force, that number had risen to over 100,000 Black women and girls. And so what we have been seeing over the years is an intensifying and increasing of this crisis, not only in terms of the number of missing Black women and girls, but also homicides as well. Homicides increased for Black women and girls larger than any other racial or gender group. And also the number of cold cases over the last couple of years have increased by 89%. So this is a long-term crisis that we've been facing within the nation, and this response is long overdue.
So sometimes I know we get lost in the numbers. Can you tell me some, not for you personal, but some stories that people in your community who are rallying behind this bill perhaps have told you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important that we're moving beyond the numbers to really recognize and honor the voices and the faces and the people and families and communities that are represented behind those numbers. And as I've been on this fight at the Minnesota legislature for the last several years to get to this point to establish the nation's first office, there are a number of family stories that really stick with me. One is the story of Brittany Clardy. And I remember the first committee hearing where we heard the story of Brittany Clardy told to our committee. And her mother, Marquita, talked about how when her daughter went missing, right away she knew something was wrong because it was not like her daughter not to be in touch with her. She had just recently turned, 18. They reached out to law enforcement, and the response that they got from law enforcement was one that we heard a lot of families experience. When they first reached out, they were told, she's an adult. People do this all the time. She's probably with her boyfriend. And so they were not heard. Their experiences with their daughter were not honored in terms of the reality that they knew when they were not hearing from her that something was wrong. And this was a family that was forced to undertake their own investigation. And 11 days later, after initially trying to make that first report, Brittany was found, and she was found deceased. She was found deceased in the trunk of her vehicle. And her mother's words stick with me because what she said was that she wakes up every morning wondering if that police response had been different when they had first reached out in search of help, and those first cries for help, had they been heard, would her daughter's story had turned out differently. And so it's stories like that that inspire me to keep doing this fight, because there are real families that have been devastated behind this crisis, and real communities as well.
Yeah. And I am so hesitant to ask this. But how can we, and I'm thinking of it because it's a conversation I had earlier today. How can we ensure the accuracy? Let's say I am the media and someone reaches out to me about their missing child, their missing daughter. How can we ensure the accuracy? How can we ensure that they aren't just off with their boyfriend? Like, how do I know better? How can I help?
And it's a really important question that you are asking, because as we look at this crisis around missing and murdered Black women and girls, there are some things that we know for sure. We know that our cases stay open 4 times longer than cases involving our white peers. So when it comes to not only the resources that are provided from law enforcement, but also thinking about those media references that can be really critical as well, to helping to bring answers to families, to bring people home, that it's important that we have that conversation around the complex interplay of things that we are going to need to address this crisis. And the media is definitely part of that. Law enforcement is definitely part of that. But we have to talk about a whole host of other things, including the impacts of systemic racism. We have to talk about gang violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, human trafficking, our foster care system. There's so many things that we need to talk about. So when we center this on sort of the media piece of this and what is the media's role within this, I think the number one thing that is at the media's disposal is to ensure that when there are individuals who are missing, that they are giving fair coverage. We're not asking for anyone to get any less coverage. What we're asking for is for Black women and girls to get the same coverage and to have their lives honored within the same ways. And as we have these conversations around the whole host of reasons why individuals can go missing, we've heard families tell their stories about when, their 10-year-old foster child was missing. They've heard similar things. She's probably with her boyfriend. If a 10-year-old is with their boyfriend, that's an issue that we need to address. And so understanding that, I think we have an opportunity here to sort of take away the stigma that can often come when we're talking about Black women and girls. Black girls are often that whole idea of adultification. They're looked at as older than they are. They're looked at as not as in need of as much help or assistance. And one of the ways that I think that we could have a really strong impact is to do something that has been out there for a while. This whole idea of doing away with the classification of runaway, because it sort of creates this idea that, well, if we believe that a child has run away, that they're not worthy of having the same efforts put into a search to find them. And I think that that's a flawed premise from the very start.
You're absolutely right. And I think of, what was it, the Gabby Patito case, and how you couldn't turn on your TV, you couldn't get on social media without seeing this. I'm just going to tell it like it is. This white woman with blonde hair, you couldn't turn on the TV without seeing her. And I'm not taking away from that situation, because that too was a very sad situation. But we don't get that for our girls. And I do remember
Absolutely.
there was a major conversation happening in the media that was about that, how Black women don't get the same coverage. But the conversation,
Absolutely.
just like everything else, that conversation died down. How can we keep that conversation going? Because the problem, as you've stated with the statistics, is only getting worse.
Even thinking about the roots of this work and how long it has taken between 2019 to 2023 to get to this point that we have had the Missing and Murdered Black Women and Girls Office finally pass off the House floor, is a testament to the fight that it takes when we are trying to get not something special, but the same coverage and the same resources. And when this conversation initially started at the legislature in 2019, I couldn't even get a hearing on this issue. And it's not lost on me that it took the murder of George Floyd in 2020 to really start this conversation in earnest at the Capitol. And so, I think that we have an opportunity here to highlight the reality that so often when these issues occur within our community and we shine a bright light on something, um, it's temporary in nature, and then all of a sudden the light moves on right to something else. And that is why we need a dedicated office, not only in Minnesota, but thinking about this as a blueprint nationwide. Because if there isn't consistent attention, if there isn't a consistent infrastructure and resources that are dedicated to addressing this crisis, we will continue to live in a world where our cases are staying open 4 times longer than other people's cases, and we don't have equal access to justice. Our families don't have equal access to answers or to bring family members home.
No equal access. I wonder, back to this Gabby Patito case and how much coverage it got. When I think of that number, those statistics you gave, there's no way we could cover all of those missing and murdered women. So I'm trying to ask this in the best way I know how. How do we pick and choose who gets the coverage?
That is what is happening right now. So we have this system of picking and choosing. And when we have this system of picking and choosing, what that results in is our cases staying open 4 times longer, because we're not going to be the ones that are picked. We already know that. History tells us that. The numbers tell us that in terms of how our cases are handled, the media attention that we receive, and even the name recognition, right? You say Gabby Patito and people know exactly who you are talking about. But if you say Elle Reagan or if you say Relisha Rudd, do people know those names? They don't oftentimes. And so I think one of the things that is so important about this office is it requires the office to have a missing person alert system so that folks who are missing will get a alert when they are missing. Because at base minimum, that should just be happening for people. We shouldn't have to be, deciding between is your story worthy or is your story, or if a person's story is worthy. That should not be how we're doing this. We should recognize and honor the humanity of all people there. And I recognize in terms of the work that you all are doing, and as you are determining how you're going to cover things, I think it's an opportunity for the media to have a long overdue conversation around what that looks like, especially in light of the fact that we know when we look at the numbers that oftentimes cases involving Black folks in general aren't getting the same attention. When we look at the numbers in terms of missing Black children within this nation, they're missing at a disproportionate rate. About 30% of kids missing that are Black within the Black within the United States, which is disproportionate to their share of the population. But when we look at the data in terms of media references to these missing Black children, they're less than 15% of the media references. So my perspective on this and the perspective of many other people is that we can do better than what we are currently doing right now. And I think that really is sort of the challenge that is out there, not only in terms of thinking of this from the law enforcement perspective and the media perspective, but also within our communities as well, because we all play a role in bringing this, and addressing this crisis.
Oh, we sure can do better. So in the spirit of doing better, how can the average everyday person help for our audience members who may want to help bring light to these situations? What can they do?
There are a number of ways that people can think about getting involved. There are great organizations that are out there that are doing work to bring answers to families and to help bring missing loved ones home. I want to lift up the Black and Missing Foundation. They are a great organization. They have helped to bring answers and folks home for hundreds of families. I also want to lift up It's On Me Too and the work that investigator Chandra Cleveland has been doing. She has helped to bring home hundreds of Black girls and women, and also to bring home answers. And those are two nonprofit organizations. Folks can give to those organizations to help support families and communities who are doing this work. Paying attention to what's going on. The Black Girl Missing podcast is a great one for people to pay attention to. And on social media, there are so many ways that you can help lift up when there is a missing persons case or people are looking for answers within a homicide case. Helping to lift up those stories can be very important. And I think right now, with Minnesota being on, leading this effort in terms of creating the nation's first office for missing and murdered Black women and girls, there is a need for there to be a national response. So talking with your elected officials about this and looking at ways that this work, which is really a blueprint for other states, can be implemented there as well, is another important way that people can think about getting involved.
Representative Richardson, thank you so much for all that you're doing.
Thank you.